I was standing just on the other side of the heavy mahogany door. I had this silver tray of warm brie and fig tartlets in my hands. That's when I heard my mother's voice float over the clinking wine glasses. She was laughing, and it sounded so bright and utterly careless. "Oh, we don't worry about Clara's future," she said. "She's always been our little simpleton." She actually told them every family needs one beautifully dumb child to keep expectations manageable. I just stood there, completely frozen in the hallway. The heat from the tartlets was literally burning through the linen napkin into my palms. And then a chorus of polite, knowing chuckles erupted from my aunts and uncles. "My name is Clara, and I'm 32 years old. I live in a restored craftsman house in Portland, Oregon with my golden retriever, Barnaby. I built this life entirely from the ground up, all by myself. I run a boutique logistics company, which sounds incredibly dry, I know. But it basically means I untangle massive, multi-million-dollar supply chain disasters for tech firms. And honestly, I'm really good at it. I make a comfortable living and have a tight-knit circle of friends. They feel way more like family to me than my actual blood relatives do. Before that night, I thought I'd finally reached a place of peace. I spent my entire adult life trying to prove to my parents that I was finally enough. I genuinely believed that if I just smiled through the holidays and hosted the expensive dinners, we had an unspoken truce. If you're new here, you might want to stick around. Stories like this one don't end the way you think they will. Hit subscribe so you never miss a single update. To understand how one sentence dismantled our relationship, you gotta understand the role I was assigned as a kid. My mother, Eleanor, is a retired university dean.
My dad was an economics professor.
In our house, intellect wasn't just valued, it was literally the only currency that mattered. If you weren't debating geopolitical theory at the dinner table by age 10, you were basically taking up unnecessary oxygen. And there was my older brother, Julian. He was the golden child, the prodigy who was reading chapter books in kindergarten. He just glided through life on this frictionless track, totally fueled by my parents' endless adoration. I, on the other hand, was dyslexic. Not that my mom ever actually used that word. To her, it was just a lack of discipline. I remember being 8, staring at a math worksheet until the numbers literally swam off the page. Tears of pure frustration would just pool in my eyes. My mom would stand over me, sighing so heavily. She had this specific brand of disappointment that settles right into your bones. By the time I hit high school, the narrative was pretty much set in stone. Julian was the scholar. I was the creative spirit, which was really just my mom's polite dinner party code for the slow one. I definitely didn't go to an Ivy League school. I went to community college, transferred to a state university, and quietly clawed my way through a business degree. I worked 3 jobs just to pull it off. Along the way, I finally figured out how my own brain worked. I developed these elaborate systems to manage my dyslexia. I actually turned my hyperfixation on details into a total superpower. When I started my logistics company at 26, I didn't tell my parents for a whole year. I was building this highly profitable business from the ground up. I just knew they wouldn't get it. I finally told them over a dry turkey dinner at Thanksgiving. My mom just patted my hand and called it a nice little organizing hobby. She didn't ask a single question. It just didn't fit the story she'd written for me. Over the years, I learned to compartmentalize. I had my real life where I negotiated complex international shipping contracts. In that world, I was building a thriving, independent empire. But whenever I was around my parents and Julian, I naturally shrank.
I'd let my dad give me outdated financial advice while secretly managing a portfolio worth way more than his pension.
I thought I was keeping the peace, but I was really just participating in my own degradation. The real turning point hit during my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. They wanted this huge, lavish party to show off to their friends. But Julian claimed he was swamped with some massive corporate merger in Chicago and couldn't help. So the whole thing fell on me, the family simpleton. But I didn't just throw a basic party. I orchestrated an absolute masterpiece. I hired a private chef, strung up fairy lights everywhere, and even flew in my mom's favorite Hawaiian orchids. I paid for every single detail out of my own pocket. I kept telling myself it was just a nice gift for their anniversary. But honestly, it was my way of proving I was a capable, successful adult. When my parents finally showed up, my mom walked right through the front door and started inspecting the place. She looked up at the vaulted ceilings and the custom wainscoting I put in myself. But instead of being proud, she just looked skeptical. She turned to me with this perfectly fake smile. She actually asked if Julian helped me with the down payment. She said the house was way too nice for a single girl on a hobby income. I just stood there, feeling that familiar sting. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced a polite smile. I looked her right in the eye and told her I bought it myself. She didn't even blink. She just gave this dismissive little chuckle I've heard my whole life. She said, "Well, however you managed it, it's very cute." Despite that, the party got into full swing and the dinner was a total triumph. The wine was flowing and the whole dining room was buzzing with my relatives. With the fairy lights glowing on the patio, it honestly looked like a flawless night. As dinner wrapped, I quietly excused myself. I slipped into the kitchen to help the chef plate the dessert. The heavy dining room door swung shut behind me, but it didn't quite latch. I picked up this heavy silver tray resting on a white linen napkin. It was loaded with these warm brie and fig tartlets. I walked toward the dining room, pausing just outside the door to balance the weight. I was standing right there in the hallway, balancing the heavy silver tray. That's when Aunt Marjorie's booming voice cut through the clinking glasses. She was going on about how proud my parents must be of Julian. And then, almost as an afterthought, she mentioned my lovely little party. But it wasn't Marjorie's backhanded compliment that shattered my reality. It was my mother's response. Her voice floated over the table, bright, musical, and utterly careless. She told the whole room not to worry about my future because I was their little simpleton. She actually said every family needs one beautifully dumb child. The worst part wasn't even the words themselves. It was the chorus of polite, knowing chuckles that erupted from my aunts and uncles. The laughter wasn't malicious. It was worse. Chilling realization. It was entirely casual. It was the sound of people agreeing on a universally accepted fact. I stood completely frozen in the hallway, unable to move a muscle. The heat of the tartlets was literally burning through the linen napkin into my palms, but I barely registered the pain. The ambient noise of the party suddenly sounded muffled. It felt like I was submerged underwater. My heart didn't race, and I didn't feel the urge to cry. Instead, a very strange cold sensation washed over me. It started at the base of my neck and traveled all the way down to my feet. It felt like a massive, heavy curtain finally dropping to the floor. In that one moment, the truth became undeniable. For 32 years, I thought if I just tried harder, my mother would eventually see my worth. Standing on the hardwood floor I paid for, I realized she saw exactly who I was.
She just preferred the version of me that made her feel superior.
My supposed dumbness wasn't a tragedy to her. It was a utility. I didn't storm into the room in a rage.
And I certainly didn't drop the tray.
I took a slow, deep breath, letting the cold clarity settle into my bones. Then I pushed the heavy door open with my hip. I walked right into the dining room. The moment I entered, the conversation shifted seamlessly.
It was like they hadn't just been tearing me apart.
My mother looked up, her eyes crinkling with that perfectly practiced smile. She announced me as the hostess, completely unfazed. Then she asked if I made the tartlets myself. I set the silver tray down on the table, my hands perfectly steady. I looked right at her, my voice completely level. I told her no, I hired a chef. I said I was much too simple to figure out puff pastry. The words hung in the air for a fraction of a second. A microsecond of genuine confusion flickered across my mother's face. It was a tiny glitch in her carefully constructed matrix. She realized I might have actually heard her, but she quickly recovered, laughing it off and reaching for a tartlet. She had no idea the dynamic between us had just permanently shattered. I spent the rest of the dinner just watching them. Really watching them, you know? It was like seeing them clearly for the very first time.
I watched Julian, the flawless golden child.
He was drinking way too much and sweating right through his expensive shirt. He kept dodging questions about his firm. Then I looked at my dad. He just looked so tired and small. He had completely surrendered his voice to my mom years ago. And finally, I watched my mother holding court. She was totally oblivious to the fact that the daughter she just mocked was holding the whole evening together. I honestly thought that hallway moment was the climax of the night. I figured the worst of it was over. But about an hour later, the guests moved out to the patio. I was back in the kitchen when my mom slipped in. She waited until the chef left, then leaned against the marble island. She just stood there, swirling her wine. She told me it was a lovely party, but her tone had completely shifted. That fake, bright energy was gone. She dropped into this low, serious register. I just kept wiping down the counter and said thanks. Then she let out this heavy sigh and said we needed to talk about Julian. I stopped what I was doing and looked up. She looked around like someone was eavesdropping. Then she tells me Julian is in a bit of a bind with a temporary cash flow issue. She called it high-level financial stuff I wouldn't understand. She stepped closer, looking right at me with this intense, calculated pressure. She said he needed $50,000? Immediately. By Tuesday. She said it so briskly. She told me her and my dad's money was all tied up in trusts. But she'd been looking around my house all night. She pointed out that I had a lot of equity. And since I didn't have a husband or kids, I didn't really have any major responsibilities. She actually suggested I take out a loan against my house? Just a little home equity line, she called it. All I had to do was sign some papers and hand the money over to Julian. She promised he'd pay me back when his bonus came through in December. The silence in that kitchen was absolute. The only sound was the low hum of my refrigerator. I just stood there, looking at the woman who brought me into the world. I took in her tailored silk blouse and her expensive blowout. She just had this expectant, slightly impatient look on her face. She had just spent the entire evening mocking my intelligence to our relatives. She had spent my whole life treating me like a slow-witted child. And now, without a shred of irony, she was demanding I mortgage my home to bail out the golden child. She didn't respect me enough to treat me like an equal. But she felt entirely entitled to my resources. I'm still amazed by the physical reaction my body had in that moment. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel heartbroken. Instead, I felt this profound, crystal clear sense of liberation. It was like the invisible strings tying me to her approval just snapped.
I leaned back against the counter and crossed my arms.
I looked her dead in the eye, and I just said, no.
My mother actually blinked.
It was a word she had literally never heard me say. She told me I wasn't listening, that Julian was in trouble. She said it could ruin his career and that it was just a signature on a piece of paper. I told her I heard her perfectly. My voice was eerily calm. I said, I heard you say he needs 50 grand. I heard you say I should take out a loan against my house to give it to him. And my answer is no. Her face started to flush this dark, mottled red. She completely lost it. She called me a selfish little girl. She started screaming about everything they had done for me. She claimed they funded my life when I was floundering. I cut right through her hysteria. I reminded her she hadn't paid for a single thing in my life since I was 18. I paid for my own college, bought my own house, and built my own business. A business that grossed over $2 million last year. I told her I didn't need a loan because I had 50 grand sitting in liquid savings right now. Her mouth actually fell open. She just stared at me, completely derailed by the numbers. You have that kind of money? She stammered. I do, I told her. Because while Julian was playing high roller in Chicago, I was actually working. I untangle complex financial messes for a living, so I know how this works. Which is why I know exactly what kind of cash flow issue requires 50 grand in 4 days. He didn't make a bad investment. So he embezzled from his firm, didn't he? My mother stumbled back a step, her hand flying to her chest. The blood drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. I had totally guessed, but her reaction told me everything. The flawless golden child was a thief. How dare you? She whispered, her voice shaking with this terrifying, venomous rage. How dare you speak about your brother that way? She told me I was just a bitter, simple-minded girl who was jealous of him. Those words were meant to destroy me and put me right back in my place. But they didn't work anymore. They just sounded pathetic. I looked at her and felt nothing but a distant, clinical pity. You're right, Mom, I said smoothly, a genuine smile finally touching my lips. I don't understand. I'm just your little simpleton. She froze. The color vanished from her face completely. She knew exactly what I was quoting. She realized I had heard every word she said in the dining room. Every family needs one beautifully dumb child to keep expectations manageable, right? I stepped toward her. I'm just too dumb to help you, Mom. Bless my heart. I walked right past her, opened the kitchen door, and held it for her. The party is over, I said. I think it's time for you to take Julian and go home.
She didn't say another word.
She just walked out of my kitchen. Her posture was completely rigid, but her face was a mask of absolute terror and fury. About 10 minutes later, I stood by the front window. I watched my mother, my dad, and Julian pile into their rental car. Then they just drove away into the Portland night. The fallout was exactly what you'd expect. Over the next few weeks, my phone absolutely blew up. My dad left all these frantic voicemails begging me to be reasonable, saying I was destroying the family. Julian called me twice, literally crying. He kept bouncing between these pathetic apologies and vicious insults.
I didn't answer a single one.
I just blocked their numbers and put my phone down. A month later, Julian was quietly let go from his law firm. He didn't go to jail, though. My parents ended up liquidating a massive chunk of their retirement to cover whatever he stole. It forced them to sell their big house and downsize to a tiny condo. Of course, the story they spin to the extended family is totally different. To them, I'm just the heartless, greedy daughter who abandoned them when they needed me most. My Aunt Marjorie even sent me this long, scolding letter all about family loyalty. I didn't even read the whole thing. I just walked over to the fireplace and used it to start a fire. Watching that paper curl up and turn to ash felt amazing. It was like watching 32 years of guilt just evaporate up the chimney. I haven't spoken to my mother in 2 years now, and honestly, I don't miss her at all. I don't miss the anxiety of trying to prove my worth.
I definitely don't miss the subtle jabs or the backhanded compliments.
And I'm so done with making myself smaller just so she could feel big. When you're told you're the weak link your whole life, you start to believe it. But the truth about being the scapegoat is they never see you coming. I was never the dumb one. I was just the only one awake. The peace that followed was something I had never experienced. I spent mornings walking my dog, Barnaby, through Portland. There was no more anxiety, no more bracing for insults. Just the quiet rhythm of a life I chose. At work, my logistics company continued to thrive. I wasn't just the simpleton with a hobby business anymore. I was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar operation. Every success was a testament to the systems I built. I surrounded myself with people who actually saw me. My tight-knit circle of friends became my real family. We spent weekends together, filling my house with genuine laughter. It was a stark contrast to the suffocating dinners of my past. The dining table that once hosted cruel jokes was now covered in board games. There were no expectations to manage. I realized true loyalty isn't about bleeding yourself dry for people who disrespect you. It's about protecting your peace. Sometimes I think about Julian, trying to rebuild his life. I wonder if my parents realize the price they paid. But those thoughts are fleeting, like shadows passing over a sunlit room. They belong to a closed chapter. I poured my morning coffee in the pristine kitchen I designed. Barnaby rested his head on my feet. I didn't need to shrink anymore to make room for anyone else's ego. I was allowed to take up space. If there's one thing to take away, it's that you don't have to accept the label your toxic family slaps on you. Their narrative is a reflection of their insecurities. You have the power to write a different ending. Building an empire isn't just about career success. It's about building an impenetrable fortress of self-worth. When you know who you are, manipulative tactics simply bounce off you. You become untouchable because you are awake to your own value. To anyone still shrinking themselves to fit into a family that refuses to see them, stop. Stop apologizing for your existence. Take all that resilience and pour it into yourself. The life you can build is beautiful. Thank you for letting me share my story. If it helps even one person recognize their worth, it was worth it. Let me know in the comments if you connected with this. And don't forget to hit subscribe. Every time I walk through these halls, I'm reminded of what it took to get here. These walls aren't just wood and paint. They're physical proof that I trusted my own vision when no one else would. My logistics company didn't just survive the family fallout, it completely thrived. When you stop pouring your energy into a black hole of expectations, things change. You suddenly have this massive ocean of focus for your own ambitions. People always ask me if I ever feel guilty about walking away. The honest truth? Not for a single second. Protecting yourself from emotional and financial abuse is never the wrong move. Barnaby and I have our own routine now, and it's incredibly peaceful. There's no more drama, no sudden crises, no frantic phone calls. Just the quiet, steady rhythm of a life built on actual love. I used to absolutely dread the holidays and all the forced family dinners.
Now I actually look forward to them because I decide who sits at my table.
Having that level of autonomy is the greatest gift I've ever given myself. If you're watching this and you're the designated scapegoat of your family, listen to me. You do not owe them your sanity, and you don't owe them your savings, and you certainly don't owe them your silence anymore. They might call you selfish or spin a narrative where you're the bad guy. Let them talk. The villain in their story is usually just the person who finally set a boundary. Being the family simpleton was honestly the best cover I could have ever asked for. It gave me the space to build my empire completely undetected. By the time they realized I wasn't playing their game, I had already won. I'm 32 years old, I have a beautiful home, and my heart is finally at peace. I didn't just survive my toxic family. I outsmarted them by simply choosing to bet on myself. Remember, you are the author of your own life, so don't let anyone else hold the pen. Drop a comment below with your own story and hit that subscribe button. I'll see you in the next video.